All right, everyone. This was really kind of our last day to kind of talking about layout using CSS. Hopefully, get a better understanding of CSS floats and CSS positioning. You don't really run into them too often, but they're useful when you need them. Uh, to be honest, most of your general layout will probably be like grids or flexbox, but there are some small elements where floats are helpful, like when you want to have text wrap around an image or a video or something like that. Um, Position has its points, especially if like you want a sticky element. So, you know, of course, I try to find one and then I can never find it, but probably find. So, for instance, that's not even sticky actually. All right. See how this, I just chose this site randomly. See how like this navigation bar stays locked to the top, even though the rest of the page is scrolling, right? That's not normally how HTML works. This is breaking normal flow. Actually, see how this feedback, I didn't, this is happened to be the, see how this feedback button kind of stays locked right to the middle of the page, no matter what? It's actually must be like a certain amount down because it's not adjusting itself. But the fact that this is like, I don't know, I'm gonna guess like 200 pixels from the top of the page or whatever it is, 300 pixels. It's always locked, and that's something you can do with positioning that you wouldn't be able to really do that with you know, um, Flexbox or grids or anything like that. So now that we're kind of at the end, giving you guys a discussion question to work on, which is essentially how was advanced web layout, right? So it's like, okay, we've gone through grids, we've gone through Flexbox, floats, positioning, do you feel like you have a better understanding, right? Because you guys are going to use these techniques for your second project. That's kind of how the second project differs from the first. Is the first one I wasn't really expecting, besides maybe using the width, much in terms of layout, but now it's like, okay, you guys should know or at least have a basic understanding of like how to set up multiple columns, making an element always, if you want like a button that's always in the bottom right-hand corner or the top left-hand corner or whatever it is that you want, you can now do that with CSS, which you wouldn't, And so how do you feel about that? Did the labs help with understanding, excuse me. Is there anything I could have done to help with, that in terms of making it easier to understand, that sort of thing? So today is the 26th. Do you should respond to this not by this Friday, but the Friday after, which is the 6th of November. In terms of other homework, a reminder that you have your Flexbox lab due this upcoming Friday, as well as the lab I assigned last Wednesday, which is about using CSS positioning or it's the one, yeah, it involved using icon fonts and using Google fonts, and now you can use floats and positioning. That was the second part that we hadn't talked about yet. And then also a reminder that your wireframes are due this Friday. Okay. Reminder that the wireframes are, a basic layout of the web pages that you're building for your second project, right? You're not focusing on colors or fonts or visuals. It's purely about structure, navigation bar, splash area, column, 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 block of text, article about the company or the nonprofit or whatever it is that, whatever it is, you know what I mean? So hopefully these give you kind of an idea of like what I'm looking for. Notice how there's no color. We're not really worried about like what image it is or even what the text is. I mean, sometimes people put in text, but really, I recommend that you don't use too much actual text because normally if you were to work with other people, if you use real text, people try to read it and they think like this is the final text. So a lot of times people use what's called dummy text or lorem ipsum. And lorem ipsum is just it's actually Latin, but it's meant to sort of represent text without people actually reading it, kind of thing. So these are due by Friday. You can build them in any program you want, as I've talked about before. That could be Figma or Adobe Illustrator or Photoshop or whatever. Just export them as a PDF format or a standard image format like a JPEG or a PNG or something like that. Okay. The reason why I have you guys do this is you want your projects to be as easy to access as possible. And a lot of times in real life, in like a real company, you're dealing with people who aren't designers, so they can't open a PSD or an AI file, but they do know how to open like a PDF file or an image, you know what I mean? So this is why it's always good to make your presentation files as accessible to everyone as possible. That's just a general life skill I would give to you, regardless of whatever you do in the future. Making your stuff accessible to everyone is never a bad thing if you want people to understand what you're doing and, that kind of stuff. All right, so the rest of this week, so Wednesday is actually lab time to work on finishing up. This brings in the sophisticated web page lab, which is due next Monday. Um, but you'll have time on Wednesday in class to work on that and work on these other labs if you haven't finished that. And then, you'll have next week will also just be lab time to really just work on assignment two, get help, all that good stuff. Okay. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at davidhurwich@sfsu.edu. Okay.